So I'm Alistair from Saberr. I'm going to talk to you today about this topic. Nothing fixes a bad manager. Nothing. So I want to start by saying that bad bosses should be taken seriously. And I want to really sort of drill this in with a few stats. So 70% of the variance in team engagement is determined by the manager. 70%, which is quite a lot. About 64% of execs believe their top challenge is developing next generation managers and leaders, and we've heard a bit of that in the last couple of presentations. But only 14% of companies feel they've got a strong bench of leaders. So that's going to be a problem coming up real soon. 56% of American workers claim their boss is mildly or highly toxic. And even worse, 75% of Americans say their boss is the most stressful part of their day. So bad bosses should be taken seriously, but I think this quote really sums it up the most. Bad bosses should be taken seriously. That's in the Harvard Business Review. That's how you know it's real. So this guy, Clifton, CEO of Gallup, he has this thing about managers. And his thing is that nothing fixes a bad manager. And Gallup's a really interesting company to quote because they have done a huge amount of research, maybe even the best researched company into what makes managers or the workplace tick. And the CEO of that company thinks that nothing fixes a bad manager. But another highly distinguished person kind of disagrees. So my question when I read something like that is like, are you sure? Are you sure that nothing fixes a bad manager? And I want to talk a little bit about this concept from an engineer's perspective. So I'm an aerospace engineer, or at least I was, before I got into HR. And an aerospace engineer's job is to try to understand a system well enough to the point where you can design that system to be better. And for me, there are no more interesting systems than human systems. And I want to give you a parallel about how you can understand very complex real-world systems using very simple engineering or mathematical principles. And this is my favorite one. So this is a flock of starlings. It's called a murmuration. Anyone seen one of these in the real world? Amazing things. There are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of birds, all individual birds, but acting in undeniable unison. There is no leader, but they are acting in unison. And so what I want to show you is how simple it is to replicate this kind of complex real-world system using very simple maths. So we're going to start by building a mathematical model of this. Here it is. This is the basic maths model that you can make. It's a bunch of birds, they're the dots, flying in random directions. And so we're going to apply 3 rules, only 3 rules, and you'll see how it can very quickly become a very clear representation of the real-world model. So rule number 1 is that all birds must fly at the same speed. So now it's a little bit less chaotic, but it still doesn't resemble the real-world system at all. So we'll apply rule number 2, which is each bird must stay close to its neighbor. So now it's looking a bit more like a flock, but it's not a realistic flock. It doesn't look anything like a murmuration. So we'll apply our 3rd and final rule, which is each bird must avoid danger. Danger is those 2 bigger blobs. And now it very accurately represents a real-world murmuration. But we did that with 3 very basic rules. And my favorite thing about human systems is that we like to pretend that they're more complicated than they are. But really, there's some very basic rules at play. And that's what I like about bringing engineering thinking to HR. So there's a professor called Sandy Pentland at MIT, and he's done some work about teams. And his big thing was, he thinks that when he sits in a room with a good team, he can tell that they're a good team. There's just something about that team. There's a sort of buzz in the room. And so he set out to try to measure what is that buzz. And it turns out that he hung these sort of sociometric badges on members of teams, and they measured all sorts of things, like how much people spoke, who they were speaking to, when they were speaking, whether everybody spoke or just a few people. And what he found was that communication patterns in teams could account for more than 50% of the variance in performance. That is to say that how we communicate as a team is more important than everything else combined. The skills, the experience, the demographic, it doesn't matter. How we communicate is more important. And so when we think about this, we try to break it down. How we communicate is governed by two things: who we are as people, our characters, but also the processes that we put in place to aid that communication. So that's the start of a good model. So can software fix bad managers? Fix. So that's what we started to do when we set out to build CoachBot, which was a piece of software to coach bad managers and fix them, essentially. And what it did was try to change their communication patterns. It tried to basically, it does lots of fancy things, but at its core is it promotes people to talk to each other. It does that through one-to-one meetings, it does that through team meetings, but the basic premise is it tries to make sure that there is an even pattern of communication across the team. That's all it does, is promote managers to talk to their team. Not groundbreaking, we're not trying to reinvent anything. So yes, encourage managers to do two things: define who they are as a team and have better one-to-one and team meetings. And what I mean by define who they are as a team is have a conversation about what their purpose is, how they agree to behave as a team, what they find meaningful at work. Have very human conversations, not too dissimilar to the questions we've been asking each other in the breaks. But we just never have those conversations at work. And so our software was designed to do exactly that. And the results was that after 6 months of using this, for only 1.5 hours per month, which is a tiny time investment when you think about it, we saw 22% improvement in team performance, 12% improvement in employee engagement, 43% improvement in psychological safety, or how much people trust each other within a team. And all we were doing was helping managers do what they already knew how to do. We weren't retraining them. We weren't telling them knowledge. We weren't telling them how to be a manager. Everybody knows how to interact with somebody else. We just don't do it for all sorts of very good social reasons. We feel awkward about the thing that we have to talk to them about. We don't like the person. There are all sorts of really good reasons. But if we can just be encouraged to have those conversations, you can fix bad managers. So, Jim, nothing fixes a bad manager. I'm sorry, but the right tool fixes a bad manager. And I want to end by saying the sort of difference between managers and great leaders. So great managers can also be taught to be great leaders. And what do I mean by the difference between a manager and a leader? Well, I like this definition. A manager finds what's unique about their team and capitalizes on it. They find what's good about you and helps you do more of that. And a leader finds what's common about you and unites you behind that. But I think the really best managers, all we're trying to teach them to do is those two things. And that's it. Thank you so much.